I'm going to take you through the process of drawing this gorgeous colourful rooster with colour pencils on drafting film. The whole tutorial lasted 10 hours and I've just done a time lapse but showed you and talked you through all of the important bits so that you can create this kind of drawing as well if you wish. Now the whole tutorial is available within my Ignite program if you would like to join my membership and work through the whole tutorial. So I have taken the 10-hour video and sped it up to just over half an hour, just so that I can sort of share with you the most important parts of this particular tutorial. I was going to use Prismacolors and I did a little bit further on, but actually decided on the luminance colours instead. And for the tail feathers here, and actually for all of the purples and violety colours throughout the piece, I used violet brown luminance and violet grey luminance, and they worked really well. I also used some of this is the ultramarine violet, and I used the dark indigo. Now the dark indigo luminance I don't think worked particularly well. You can see I've started to use it on the feathers here, and actually it left it a little bit sort of bitty. I couldn't get a smooth lay down, and I ended up, I think, using black in the end. I persevered with the dark indigo a little bit, but I didn't really like using it. Using the, I did use a couple of Prismas in there as well, just sort of to smooth, but I didn't really, I have to say, I didn't particularly like using them, and I found them a little bit sort of blobby. One of the main reasons I didn't use the Prisma to begin with was the fact that they kept breaking. The colour that, or the pencil that I found really worked well to smooth and to kind of add a little bit of something was the white Derwent Drawing. I found that really helpful, and you'll see in this next bit when I bring in these sort of more greeny bluey feathers, it works incredibly well. The drafting film, it's not easy to get a really smooth lay down of pencil. As much as people say you can use things to help smooth it, cotton buds, all of that kind of stuff, you can't. It doesn't work. And actually what I ended up doing with these feathers here is throwing everything at them. You know, I'm not going to talk the colours. I'm not going to talk through the colours that I'm using here because it's too quick. And I can't remember what the colours are. The individual colours. I think some of the blues are like cobalt blues, all of that kind of stuff. I found those sort of very greeny blues really helpful in the luminance range as well. And for these two feathers, these really iridescent feathers, it was a case of adding layer after layer after layer after layer, increasing my pressure quite a lot, and then using the white drawing over the top of that to sort of smooth and bring out some of those sort of like white highlighty bits. It looks a bit scrappy, I have to say, so very close up like this, but it did work really nicely. Here I think it just went a little bit wrong and I had to take some of the pigment out, but in the end it looks really nice on the finished piece, and it does look iridescent, which worked really well. But you can see it is quite difficult to get it all really smooth. It just doesn't seem to work particularly well on the drafting film. And I didn't want to spend ages and ages doing tiny little details. It's just not, it wasn't something that I wanted to do. I wanted it to be a fun tutorial, but one that actually wasn't going to take forever, and we didn't have to spend ages drawing these little tiny details. So the white drawing was a very useful pencil. If you haven't got one, I would definitely recommend getting it, because it just helped to sort of smear everything together a little bit, and it helped to bring out some of those highlighty bits. So yeah, predominantly it was the violet grey and the violet brown that I used, which did work really well. This second feather I did a little bit differently, I think, learning from the first one, starting out with that, I think it was mid or light malachite green, something like that. Just, it's a really lovely colour, and it did work really nicely with the blues, and you can see just kind of adding those, that's the violet brown I think on there, just adding those shadowy bits in. And then I think that's the black, the polychromos black in there, just sort of darkening it up rather than using that luminance dark indigo. I found one of the really lovely mixes was the green and the violet. Honestly, it was so nice. It looked so nice, and it's definitely a mix that I will use again. I think it just works really beautifully. That's actually the dark indigo again here, and I think this is the point where I decided I didn't want to use it anymore because it was getting a little bit cloggy. It kind of just didn't feel great. Yeah, and then just before we get to those sort of orangey and grey feathers, we have this last little feather to do here. And I guess when I first started to do it, I wanted to make it a little bit more detailed, and then I think again I just found that it was. I probably would have had to have slowed down too much and really taken time out to create details. And I wanted it all to connect and wanted it all to look similar. So again, just sort of, bashing in some of those colours and then using the white again, just to help. Well, I don't know whether I used the white or not. But I found the luminance colours really, really helpful to sort of smooth everything and blend everything out. Oh yeah, the white there, which worked really, really well. And then coming down here, I decided I wanted to sort of plot colour. It got a little bit easier down here because we were just more using the purples and those greeny colours. So it became a little less, not complicated, but we weren't putting loads and loads and loads of colours in. I did use very sharp pencils, just because we were using quite small areas. We were drawing in quite small areas. So I did use relatively sharp pencils in here, probably sharper than I normally would do. And then it just got to the point where I started to plot the shapes. Very easy to do in this area because it's basically that sort of grey colour, purpley grey colour, and the that bright orange. So it was just sort of mapping out where those dark areas were, and then we could bring in the other colours and everything, underneath. And like I say, the purples and those greens worked really, really nicely together. I think that's the grey blue that I'm using there. Again, a really nice blue that I don't think I've used before, but it did work surprisingly well. So luminance mostly throughout, which I think worked really nicely. It's just, I guess for me it's a feel. Very much about how something feels rather than, I guess the lay down's important as well, but the feel of a pencil for me is important because that's what I actually really enjoy. I like to, I get an awful lot from the feel of something, rather than just the look of it. That's where the enjoyment comes. It's very much part of the process, and again, it's about layering, lots of layering, and taking away the line art helped incredibly. I have to say, the line art took quite a long time. And in the end, I didn't use it on the second half of the portrait nearly as much as I did on the first half. Actually, I found it way easier not to kind of rely on the line art. This is another thing that's working really, really well. I can't remember. Oh, I think this is the Payne's Grey. So the Payne's Grey polychromos with one of those luminance greens over the top. Fantastic, worked like a dream, worked so nicely. And again here, just plotting out those shapes and those colours, and then bringing the oranges in here. So I used lots and lots of different oranges, which are listed in the materials list. The luminance orange and the polychromos dark cadmium orange were the ones that I used the most. And then I also use things like dark red. I started to use sanguine in the latter part of the portrait, and I used things like russet, and there was another colour as well somewhere. But mostly on these feathers here, mostly it was the orange. I can't remember what this one is. It's some kind of red, I think. And they just worked really, really nicely. I wanted it to have that sort of flamey sort of feel. So I picked quite a few oranges, and some of them worked better than others. It's just about layering, really. One of the things that I found, if I was working with the line art underneath, I think it's a very human thing to draw up to the lines. And actually, what happens is when you've got the line art underneath and you're drawing up to the lines, you get these little white lines in between, little gaps in between, because we don't like to go over the lines when we're drawing. And actually, that wasn't a great thing, because you ended up getting these sort of white lines in between all of your colours and everything, which wasn't good. Slice tool I used an awful lot of as well. And then down here again, this was the Payne's Grey. Payne's Grey I found to be the best grey to use, or the darkest grey to use in here. I liked that it had that sort of bluey tinge, particularly with the orange and blue, obviously complementary colours. And then sort of bringing in some of that violety colour in there as well, and the Payne's Grey just to darken it up. And I just sort of plotted all of these shapes. Quite easy to do, but obviously you sort of have to find your way on the reference photo and then in the line drawing. One thing you could do, if you had a mind to, when you were creating your line drawing, you could actually kind of sort of initial in some of these areas. You could go grey. You could put a little G for grey if you wanted to, if that would help. You could put a little O for orange, so you kind of know which each shape is. And I think that if you do that can help. If you get really overwhelmed and you get lost with lots and lots of shapes, I do that. I get really overwhelmed with all of my shapes, and I'm like, I don't even know where this is. And that can be a really useful thing, to sort of an addition to your line art, if you like. But you can see here where I'm just sort of, again, just plotting my oranges. Be careful, if you've got your dark colours down there, be careful when you bring your oranges in not to run it over the top of your darks, because it will pull those darks in. We talk about drafting film not blending, but if you bring a lighter colour in over the top of your dark, it might just bring some of that dark colour onto the either onto the tip of your pencil, or just smear it out into where you're drawing, and you don't really want that. Yeah, and then obviously working on the values, but really not concentrating a huge amount on detail as such. It's more about getting a nice sort of idea about, how it's going to work. And then this bit here, I thought about while I was in bed, and I was like, do you know what? I'm just going to whack the colour in over the entire area. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the details in over the top, because it's got these sort of like little white lines and everything. And I thought, if I do that, actually it'll probably feel a little bit easier. Just bringing that sort of colour in over the top, and it did. And just using the eraser to bring those white elements in worked really, really well. It gave it a softness, and I just really liked it. The reds over the yellows as well. I think I used orange again here. There's another one, dark chrome yellow, that worked really, really well, which has got sort of like a bit of an orangey feel to it. Now, interestingly enough, when you are removing pigment from something that is highly pigmented, like the oranges, like the reds, it tends to stain the film underneath. And what I found was, when I was taking the pigment out on something that was quite a yellowy orange, it was leaving it quite yellowy. And some places I wanted it to look more pink. So all I did was I took I think it was the russet colour, Luminance Russet, and just went over the top of the area that I wanted pink, and then removed it, and it then became pink rather than yellowy coloured. That worked really, really well, actually, and it didn't mean that I had to spend a huge amount more time adding the pigment. It was just a quick zhuzh with the russet, and it did work really, really nicely. So you can see this is working really well, and it's not about sitting there trying to work out where all of the detail and everything is. This area here, again, sort of trying to plot as much as I could just with solid colour. A little bit of value work going on in there. And then removing the information with the slice tool. Now, this area here didn't actually work as well as I wanted it to work. And it's because I brought the Tombow in first. And what I should have done is, you can see I've just covered it all with colour. What I should have done is gone in with the slice tool rather than the Tombow. The Tombow was just too thick and vague. So I kind of carried on with the Tombow because I'd started, and then I had to go back in and bring more pigment in over the top and then use my slice tool. Actually, if I just used the slice tool over the top of that whole area of pigment, I think it would have worked a lot better. But you know, it's a learning point, isn't it? And if you're watching this and you're wanting to do sort of a similar thing with it, then you could, you know, you could just go straight in with the slice tool rather than using the Tombow first. And then of course it's a case of going, it's like the hokey cokey, isn't it? You go in out with the pigment, with the you know, with the values, all of that kind of thing, just building it up a little bit. And it is amazing how much you can throw at drafting film. You know, people are like, oh, it'll only take 4 layers. No, rubbish. It'll take so many layers. And actually you'll find when you're drawing parts of this where you're kind of throwing an awful lot of colour at it, it just keeps taking the colour. It's amazing stuff to work with. It really, really is. So you can see, you know, it's working. It's giving a nice effect. Is it exactly the same as the photograph? No. Does it matter? No. You know, so combination of slice, combination of the Tombow, and then putting the colour back in again with your pencils. Yeah, I you know, this kind of work I quite enjoy. I do quite enjoy really, really sort of technical, tiny little detail work. I have to say, drawing birds isn't my most favourite thing to do because the symmetrical patterns and stuff don't kind of work with my brain. And I wonder whether that's why maybe with this particular one, I decided to sort of make it a little bit more, not necessarily painterly, but, you know, not dive straight into the details. We then come to the head, the little eye, very simple little eye. Be gentle at first with your colour. I think I used some dark indigo in there and then kind of went back in with the black, little bits of blue in there just to bring that little catch light to life. And then around the eye, they look like these little sort of wormy bits around the eye. You could have spent ages and ages and ages doing these, but actually they're just little round blobs and they work really well. This is where I brought the prismas in. This is cadmium red, I think it is. It's like a pinky red. I thought this would be like a really nice base. And I started off with just a bit so that I could then test it out. Tombow first, all right. Electric eraser, actually awesome. But it did look a little bit spotty. But actually then when we went through it and we added more pigment, it started to come together really nicely. I can't remember what this colour's called. I think it's Scarlet something. Is it Scarlet Lake? Something like that. I can't remember. And then we've got some dark red in there, Polychromos dark red, which again worked really, really nicely. And kind of incorporating everything into it, throwing everything into it just to try and get the effect basically. And then decided that was working, so just plotted the rest of the colour in, using little circly marks again because we've got that sort of texture, so it's a little bit like a dog's nose in a way, you know. And then just the bits of feather around the top of the head there, introducing some burnt sienna. Quite nice doing this because it's a small area. There's some quite nice colour in there. I actually really enjoyed drawing the head. I think the techniques that I used worked really, really well. I was surprised at the electric eraser working so well, and I think it's going to be something that I will continue to use. I think this might be Venetian red, not Venetian red. I can't remember. No, it's dark red, isn't it? This one. But yeah, the that electric eraser. It's actually a USB eraser. It's the Derwent USB, so it recharges with a USB, and it just worked really, really nicely. This is dark indigo that I'm using here over the top of the red. Beautiful for those darker areas because it makes it purple. So we didn't want it to be black. We wanted that sort of like grapey colour, and it worked really, really nicely. And then again, using the electric eraser. Now, what I did was I had a piece of sandpaper, I think it's about 1200 grit, on my drawing board, and every now and again I just ran my eraser onto that so that it would sharpen it, but it would also get rid of the pigment. And then I used it very, very, very gently. So your pressure is key, as with everything. If you touch it very gently to the surface, you can get tiny little dots out. If you don't, then it's going to take an awful lot out. You know, but I think this worked really well. I think it worked really, really well. It's not super incredibly detailed and exactly the same as the photograph, but it looks like a chicken's head. It does. I think it's great. And then the little beak, you know, relatively simple with the beak, using the, I think that was dark sepia that I used. Just being very aware of where you're bringing the colour in. I wanted to bring a little bit of extra blueness. I think that was the dark indigo that I used here. And then I moved on to using some indanthrene blue just to get a little bit of that blue in there. What's that noise? Oh, gosh. Sorry about that. There's a bit of an alarm there. Yeah, so it did. It worked really, really nicely, and I'm really happy actually with how the head worked out. And I think, you know, using a different technique, a different tool, it just gives you the element of something else to use, doesn't it? It gives you something else to use, and I just think that's amazing. The little wattly bit, or whatever you call it, underneath, again, you know, nice to draw. Don't forget to bring your values in. Values are really, really important. Actually, at the end, I did go in and darken some of these with, I think I used the Mars Black, just to darken some of these shadows a little bit more. Which was really useful, actually. It really did work nicely. The Mars Black is the light fast Mars Black, and it's got that lovely richness to it. It's very reddy black, but it's very, very dark. And on drafting film, it stays really dark. Whereas if I use something like Caput Mortuum Violet, on drafting film, it becomes quite a crimsony colour. It becomes quite vibrant. And I didn't want that. I wanted it to be, you know, really, really nice and dark. So, yeah, the head, very pleased with. I have a play around with the electric eraser. I think it's a tool I'm going to use for quite a while. Obviously, it kind of spits up quite a lot of pigment, so, you know, you need to make sure that you're brushing it off. So this area here, the neck, I brought a lot of yellows, oranges, reds, that kind of stuff in. And I kind of split it into sort of three areas. The yellowy area, which I'm doing now, the middle area, which is more sort of coming through to orange, then moving through to red, and then moving back to orange. This is where I use that chrome, dark chrome yellow, which worked beautifully, and also some brown ochre 10%. I mixed in some cinnamon in with that as well, and it did work really, really nicely. You know, it just gave a really lovely effect. And then bringing those violety colours in, violet brown and violet grey. I think this is where I started to bring a little bit of the sanguine in as well. Again, which worked really nicely because it's got that pinky undertone to it. And when you use that, I use the cinnamon in here as well, and that was like, oh god, that colour was just, it just worked beautifully. It worked so nicely. Taking away that an under bit, and then I started to have a play around, should I use the electric eraser, and then I ended up using the slice tool. I was like, no, this is better. And just sort of following the reference photo, but not following the reference photo, bringing in some sort of feathery details that was more like the look and feel rather than exactly the same as the reference photo. And then bringing in some of those darker colours, you know, just to sort of lift it. The burnt ochre there was quite a good one to use, just to sort of lift it a little bit, bring in a little bit more structure. And it worked really, really well. So like I said, you've got this sort of yellowy part in that, and on that left side. Then we move into the orangey part, which is in the middle, and then we move over to sort of red, and then it goes back to orange again. I think the subtraction tools worked really, really well and in my favour with this piece as well. Kept on bringing that line art back in. Again, you can see I'm using the violet here, just to sort of bring those sort of vein bits in, and it just worked really nicely. Of course, yellow and purple, complementary colours, always going to look spectacular. You know, if things went a little bit wrong, it didn't matter. A feather down there at the bottom's not particularly brilliant. Did it matter? No, doesn't matter at all. The fact that I was just having a really nice time plotting colour and making shapes and we had a really colourful rooster sort of emerging, that was all that mattered really. Yeah, it was really enjoyable. Then comes that orangey bit, that dark cadmium orange, very much a colour that I've used throughout. Again, not really concentrating on those lines. I feel like, oh God, I spent so long doing this line drawing and then I just didn't. I think this is again where I introduced, this is the russet, which funnily enough, it was more pinky than anything else. And I also introduced a little bit of India red. The Indian red is a fabulous colour if you're going to be working with oranges. It really is super. This is the Mars black. So this was a bit of a game changer, I think. I don't think I'd have used it anywhere else, but it worked really, really well in this area. You know, just darkening some of those little values and everything. I went back into sort of like the head area and darkened some of those, and it just... The Mars Black, a very good choice, I think, when you're working with oranges, reds, that sort of stuff. So it is very dark, but it's not black. It's just got that lovely warmth to it. And it just works so well. Reds again, just building those values, just bringing all of that structure in there without having to... really concentrate on that line art that's underneath it. Again, I just had the reference photo next to me and I was just like, oh, put a bit of, you know, some of those little veins in there, some of the feathery areas in there. And I just sort of made it up really, rather than concentrate on everything being exactly the same as the photograph. And that's what I love about this piece, and what I really do hope that people will embrace with this piece is the fact that you don't have to follow the reference photo exactly. There's a nice area in the, I think I've made it as a separate video, I can't remember now, but I might make it as a separate video, where I talk about the fact that just because you're doing something realistically doesn't mean to say you have to follow the photograph exactly. You can put your own stamp on it. You can have a little bit of fun with it. You know, it just doesn't matter. And actually, it's incredibly creative to be able to work like that as well. This area here, very interesting. So I had a play before. This is the sanguine that I'm using here. And I decided against putting the sanguine on the back and using the slice tool. Then I wish I'd actually done that, and I went back and I actually did that. So what I've done here is I've kind of put the sanguine in first, and then I've used the Mars Black. The Mars Black, when used in larger areas, actually doesn't lay down very well. So you'll see I kind of lost the plot a little bit for a minute, and I just whacked all of the colour down and it looks really bad. Hopefully this is... this is your sign to tell you that it doesn't matter if something looks really bad. You know, when you whack all of this down and you think, oh my goodness, the rest of it looks great, and look at how awful this looks. So I flipped the film over and I put all of the sanguine in on the back, with the thinking that actually now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the top of all of the black, the Mars Black that I did with Polychromos Black, so make all of that darker, which I did, kind of concentrating on those little areas of sort of like really dark little ends of the feathers, and then using the slice tool to bring all of those little goldeny feathers back out. And I think this worked really nicely. It's not the same as the reference photo, but it's not bad. To say that this was a little bit sort of slapdash, this last bit here, and actually I think it looks great. It's dark, you've got the feathery bits in there. You can sit here and spend hours and hours and hours making it exactly the same as the photo if you want, but I think you're still going to get a spectacular result doing what I've done here. And I think it worked really nicely, putting that sanguine on the back and then using the slice tool just to take out those marks and having the sanguine shining through. To me, I think that worked really, really nicely. I'm really proud of it. I think it looks great. So I had a lot of fun with this piece. It was nice to use lots of different colours. I really hope that you'll give it a go, and I really hope that you'll give it a go with the whole sort of ethos that you don't have to copy stuff exactly, and you can just have a fun time laying all of these colours down.